Good evening and welcome to the Christmas Eve service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. My name is Arthur Kuhl, today's worship associate. Please note that there will be no worship service tomorrow morning, the Christmas Day, Sunday, December 25th, so don't forget. Our next worship service will take place on Sunday, January 1st. It will be a traditional burning bowl ceremony, an intergenerational event to burn away the things we'd rather forget about last year and to focus on the things we want in the new year. Everyone of any age is welcome. As we now enter the formal part of the service, please take a few deep breaths and relax in your seats as I ring the peace bowl 3 times after the following reading. For everything there is a season, a time to die and a time to be born. With the arrival of winter's low dark sky, communities around the world look to the miracle of light as a sign of rebirth and a source of hope. We celebrate the promise of new life and recommit ourselves to everyone's right to his or her own radiant humanity. We will now light the chalice, symbol of our faith. We welcome the coming of the days we have waited for. We have realized hope, yet know that hope can never be realized. We commit ourselves to patience. We commit ourselves to love and to hope. We light this flame as an end, as a beginning, as a simple symbol of the eternal now.
Good evening. Our opening words this evening is the poem, Christmas Poem by Mary Oliver. It says a country legend told every year, go to the barn on Christmas Eve and see what the creatures do as that long night tips over. Down on their knees they will go, the fire of an old memory whistling through their minds. I went, wrapped to my eyes against the cold. I creaked back the barn door and peered in. From town, the church bells spilled their midnight music, and the beasts listened, yet they lay in their stalls like stone. Oh, the heretics! Not to remember Bethlehem, or the star as bright as the sun, or the child born on a bed of straw, to know only of the dissolving now. Still they drowsed on, citizens of the pure, the physical world. They loomed in the dark, powerful of body, peaceful of mind, innocent of history. Brothers, I whispered, it is Christmas, and you are no heretics, but a miracle. Immaculate still as when you were thundered forth on the morning of creation. As for Bethlehem, that blazing star still sailed the dark, but only looked for me, caught in its light, listening again to its story. I curled against some sleepy beast who nuzzled my hair as though I were a child and warmed me the best it could all night. In a moment, I'll invite you to sing our opening carol, number 244, It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. But I want to give you a little background on this in case you had not heard this before. The lyrics to this beloved carol were written by the Unitarian minister at Reverend Edmund Sears in 1849, and it was set to music in 1850. It is believed he wrote the carol about peace in response to the recent war with Mexico. If you get a chance to visit our church in Weston, Massachusetts, where Sears served for a time, you can see an early manuscript of the carol in a display case in the Sears Chapel dedicated to him. This beautiful chapel, which is reminiscent of an old Norman church, was built in the 1930s during the height of the Depression. And it was built especially for children's worship. So the altar area is roughly 2/3 scale. It's a beautiful place. It is very unique, and it's a great place to do worship services. That church does their services in the summertime there because it's air conditioned. So it's a nice chapel for that. But I'd highly recommend to visit if you're ever in the Boston area. So now I invite you to remain seated, if you like, and sing hymn number 244, It Came Upon the Midnight Clear.
It came upon the midnight clear, that glorious song of old, from angels bending near the earth to touch their harps of gold. Peace on the earth to all goodwill, from heaven the news we bring. The world in and ever o'er its babble sounds the blessed angels sing. But with the woes of war and strife the world has suffered long. Beneath the angel strain have rolled 2,000 years of wrong, and we who fight and wars hear not the love song which they bring. Oh, hush the noise of battle strife, and hear the angels sing. For lo, the days are hastening on, by prophet bards foretold, when with the ever-circling years comes round the age of gold, when peace shall over all the earth its ancient splendors fling, and the whole world give back the song which now the angels sing.
Tonight I will be reading the story, A Child's Christmas in Wales, by the Welsh poet and writer Dylan Thomas, who lived between 1914 and 1953. This story, which he wrote in 1952, has been called a narrative poem in its format, and he speaks about childhood Christmas memories growing up in the 1920s in Wales. So sit back and relax as I read the story. I have no doubt parts of it will stir up some of your own childhood memories of this holiday season. One Christmas was so much like the other in those years around the Seatown corner now, out of all sound except the distant speaking of the wolves' voices I sometimes hear a moment before sleep, that I can never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, or whether it snowed for 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6. All the Christmases roll down towards the two-tongued sea like a cold and headlong moon bundling down the sky that was our street. And they stop at the rim of the ice-edged, fish-freezing waves, and I plunge my hands in the snow and bring out whatever I can find. In goes my hand into that wool-white, bell-tongued ball of holidays resting at the rim of the carol-singing sea, and out come Mrs. Prothero and the fireman. It was on the afternoon of the day of Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden waiting for cats with her son Jim. It was snowing. It was always snowing at Christmas. December, in my memory, is white as Lapland, although there were no reindeers. But there were cats. Patient, cold and callous, our hands wrapped in socks, we waited to snowball the cats. Sleek and long as jaguars, and horrible-whiskered, spitting and snarling, they would slide and sidle over the white back garden walls. And the lynx-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur-capped and moccasined trappers from Hudson Bay off Mumbles Road, would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green of their eyes. The wise cats never appeared. We were so still, Eskimo-footed Arctic marksmen in the muffling silence of the eternal snows, eternal ever since Wednesday, that we never heard Mrs. Prothero's first cry from her igloo at the bottom of the garden. Or if we heard it at all, it was to us like a far-off challenge of our enemy and prey, the neighbor's polar cat. But soon the voice grew louder. "Fire!" cried Mrs. Prothero, and She beat the dinner gong, and we ran down the garden with snowballs in our arms toward the house. And smoke, indeed, was pouring out of the dining room, and the gong was bombilating, and Mrs. Prothero was announcing ruin like a town crier in Pompeii. This was better than all the cats and whales standing on a wall in a row. We bounded into the house laden with snowballs and stopped at the open door of the smoke-filled room. Something was burning all right. Perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who always slept there after midday dinner with a newspaper over his face. But he was standing in the middle of the room saying, "A fine Christmas," and smacking at the smoke with his slipper. "Call the fire brigade," cried Mrs. Prothero as she beat the gong. "They won't be here," said Mr. Prothero. "It's Christmas." There was no fire to be seen, only clouds of smoke, and Mr. Prothero standing in the middle of them, waving his slipper as though he were conducting. "Do something," he said. And we threw all our snowballs into the smoke. I think we missed Mr. Prothero and ran out of the house to the telephone box. "Let's call the police as well," Jim said, "and the ambulance, and Ernie Jenkins. He likes fires." But we only called the fire brigade, and soon the fire engine came, and 3 tall men in helmets brought a hose into the house, and Mr. Prothero got out just in time before they turned it on. Nobody could have had a noisier Christmas Eve. And when the firemen turned off the hose and were standing in the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Miss Prothero, came downstairs and peered in at them. Jim and I waited very quietly to hear what she would say to them. She said in the right thing, always. She looked at the 3 tall firemen in their shining helmets, standing among the smoke and cinders and dissolving snowballs, and she said, "Would you like anything to read?" Years and years ago, when I was a boy, when there were wolves and whales and birds the color of red flannel petticoats whisk past the harp-shaped hills, when we sang and wallowed all night and day in caves that smelt like Sunday afternoons in damp front farmhouse parlors, and we chased with the jawbones of deacons the English and the bears before the motor car, before the wheel, before the duchess-faced horse, when we rode the daft and happy hills bareback, it snowed and it snowed. But here a small boy says, "It snowed last year, too. I made a snowman, and my brother knocked it down, and I knocked down my brother, and then we had tea." "But that was not the same snow," I said. Our snow was not only shaken from the whitewash buckets down the sky, it came shawling out of the ground and swam and drifted out of the arms and hands and bodies of the trees. Snow grew overnight on the roof of the houses like pure and grandfather moss, minutely ivied the walls, and settled on the postman opening the gate like a dumb, numb thunderstorm of white torn Christmas cards. Were there postmen then, too? With sprinkling eyes and wind-cherried noses on spread, frozen feet, they crunched up to the doors and mittened on them manfully. But all that the children could hear was a ringing of bells. "You mean that the postman went rat-a-tat-tat and the doors rang?" "I mean that the bells that the children could hear were inside them. I only hear thunder sometimes, never bells." There were church bells, too. Inside them? No. In the bat-black, snow-white belfries, tugged by bishops and storks. And they rang their tidings over the bandaged town, over the frozen foam of the powder and the ice cream hills, over the crackling sea. It seemed that all the churches boomed for joy under my window, and the weathercocks crew for Christmas on our fence. Get back to the postmen. They were just ordinary postmen. fond of walking and dogs and Christmas and the snow. They knocked on the doors with blue knuckles. Ours has got a great black knocker. And then they stood on the white welcome mat in the little drifted porches and huffed and puffed, making ghosts with their breath, and jogged from foot to foot like small boys wanting to go out. And then the presents? And then the presents after the Christmas box. And the cold postman with a rose on his button nose tingled down the tea-tray slithered run of the chilly, glinting hill. He went in his ice-bound boots like a man on a fishmonger's slabs. He wagged his bag like a frozen camel's hump, dizzily turned the corner on one foot, and by God, he was gone. Gone back to the presents? There were useful presents, engulfing mufflers of the old coach days and mittens made for giant sloths, zebra scarfs of a substance like silky gum that could be tug-of-warred down to the galoshes, blinding tam-o'-shanters like patchwork tea cozies, and bunny-suited busbies and balaclavas for the victims of head-shrinking tribes. From aunts who always wore wool next to their skin were mustached and rasping vests that made you wonder why the aunts had any skin left at all. And once I had a little crocheted nose bag from an aunt now, alas, no longer whinnying with us. And pictureless books in which small boys, though warned with quotations not to, would skate on Farmer Giles' pond and did and drowned. And books that told me everything about the wasp except why. Go on to the useless presents. Bags of moist and many-colored jelly babies, and a folded flag and a false nose, and a tram conductor's cap, and a machine that punched tickets and rang a bell, never a catapult. By a mistake that no one could explain, a little hatchet and a celluloid duck that made, when you pressed it, a most unduck-like sound, a mewing moo that an ambitious cat might make who wished to be a cow. And a painting book in which I can make the grass, the trees, the sea, and the animals any color I please. And still the dazzling sky blue sheep are grazing in the red field under the marvelous rainbow-billed and pea-green birds. Hard-boileds, toffee, fudge, and all sorts, crunches, cracknel, humbugs, glaciers, marzipan, and butterwelsh for the Welsh, and troops of bright tin soldiers who, if they could not fight, could always run, and snakes and families, and happy ladders, and easy hobby games for little engineers complete with instructions. Oh, easy for Leonardo, and a whistle to make the dogs bark, to wake up the old man next door, to make him beat on the wall with his stick to shake our picture off the wall. And then it was breakfast under the balloons. Were there uncles in our house? There are always uncles at Christmas, the same uncles. And on Christmas morning, with dog-disturbing whistle, I would scour the swathed town for news of the little world and find always a dead bird by the post office or the white deserted swings, perhaps a robin, all but one of his fires out. Men and women waiting, scooping back from chapel with taproom noses and wind-bust cheeks, all albinos huddled, their stiff black jarring feathers against the irreligious snow. Mistletoe hung from the gas brackets in all the front parlors. There was sherry and walnuts and bottled beer and crackers by the desert spoons, and cats in their furabouts watched the fires, and the high-heaped fire spat all ready for the chestnuts and the mulling pokers. Some few large men sat in the front parlors without their collars, uncles almost certainly, trying their new cigars, holding them out judiciously at arm's length, returning them to their mouths, coughing, then holding them out again as though waiting for the explosion. And some few small aunts, not wanting not wanted in the kitchen, nor anywhere else for that matter, sat on the very edges of their chairs, poised and brittle, afraid to break, like faded cups and saucers. Not many those mornings trod the piling streets. An old man always, fawn-bowlered, yellow-gloved, and at this time of year with spats of snow, would take his constitutional by the white bowling green and back, as he would take it wet or fire on Christmas Day or Doomsday. Sometimes 2 hale young men with big pipes blazing, no overcoats and wind-blown scarves, would trudge unspeaking down to the forlorn sea, to work up an appetite, to blow away the fumes, who knows, to walk into the waves until nothing of them was left but 2 curling smoke clouds of their inextinguishable briars. Then I would be slapdashing home, the gravy smell of the dinners of others, the bird smell, the brandy, the pudding and mince, coiling up to my nostrils, when out of a snow-clogged side lane would come a boy the spit of myself, with the violet past of a black eye, cocky as a bullfinch, leering all to himself. I hated him on sight and sound, and would be about to put my dog whistle to my lips and blow him off the face of Christmas, when suddenly he, with a violet wink, put his whistle to his lips and blew so stridently, so high, so exquisitely loud, that gobbling faces, their cheek bulged with goose, would press against the tinselled windows the whole length of the white, echoing street. For dinner we had turkey and blazing pudding, and after dinner the uncles sat in front of the fire, loosened all buttons, put their large, moist hands over their watch chains, groaned a little, and slept. Mothers, aunts, and sisters scuttled to and fro bearing tureens. Aunt Bessie, who had already been frightened twice by a clockwork mouse, whimpered at the sideboard and had some elderberry wine. The dog was sick. Auntie Dosey had to have 3 aspirins, but Auntie Hannah, who liked port, stood in the middle of the snowbound backyard singing like a big-bosomed thrush. I would blow up balloons to see how big they would blow up to, and then when they burst, which they all did, the uncles jumped and rumbled. In the rich and heavy afternoon, the uncles breathing like dolphins and the snow descending, I would sit among festoons and Chinese lanterns and nibble dates and try to make a model man-o-war following the instructions for little engineers, and produce what might be mistaken for a seagoing tramcar. Or I would go out, my bright new boots squeaking into the white world, onto the seaward hill to call on Jim and Dan and Jack, and to pad through the still streets, leaving huge, deep footprints in the hidden pavements. I bet people will think there have been hippos. What would you do if you saw a hippo coming down our street? I'd go like this, bang! I'd throw him over the railings and roll him down the hill, and then I'd tickle him under the ear and he'd wag his tail. What would you do if you saw 2 hippos, iron-flanked and bellowing he-hippos, clanked and battered through the scuttling snow toward us as we passed Mr. Daniels' house? Let's post Mr. Daniels a snowball through his letterbox. Let's write things in the snow. Let's write, Mr. Daniel looks like a spaniel all over his yard. Or we walked on to the white shore. Can the fishes see it's snowing? The silent, one-clouded heavens drifted onto the sea. Now we were snow-blind travelers, lost on the north hills, and vast dew-lapped dogs with flasks around their necks ambled and shambled to us, baying, Excelsior! We returned home through the poor streets where only a few children fumbled with bare red fingers in the wheel-rutted snow and cat-called after us, their voices fading away as we trudged uphill into the cries of the dark birds and the hooting of ships in the whirling bay. And then, at tea, the recovered uncles would be jolly, and the ice cake loomed in the center of the table like a marble grave. Auntie Hannah laced her tea with rum because it was only once a year. Bring out the tall tales now, and we told by the fire as the gaslight bubbled like a diver. Ghosts hooed like owls in the long nights when I dared not look over my shoulder. Animals lurked in the cubbyhole under the stairs where the gas meter ticked. And I remember that we went singing carols once when there wasn't the shaving of a moon to light the flying streets. At the end of a long road was a drive that led to a large house, and we stumbled up the darkness of the drive that night, each one of us afraid, each one of us holding a stone in his hand just in case, and all of us too brave to say a word. The wind through the trees made noises as of old and unpleasant, and maybe web-footed men wheezing in caves. We reached the black bulk of the house. What shall we give them? Hark the herald? No, Jack said. Good King Wenceslas, I'll count 3. 1, 2, 3, and we began to sing, our voices high and seemingly distant in the snow-felted darkness around the house that was occupied by nobody we knew. We stood close together near the dark door. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, and then a small, dry voice, like the voice of someone who has not spoken for a long time, joined our singing, a small, dry, eggshell voice from the other side of the door, a small, dry voice through the keyhole. And when we stopped running, we were outside our house. The front room was lovely. Balloons floated under the hot water bottle gulping gas. Everything was good again and shone over the town. Perhaps it was a ghost, Jim said. Perhaps it was trolls, Dan said, who was always reading. Let's go in and see if there's any jelly left, Jack said, and we did that. Always on Christmas night, there was music. An uncle played the fiddle, a cousin sang Cherry Ripe, and another uncle sang Drake's Drum. It was very warm in the little house. Auntie Hannah, who had got on to the parsnip wine, sang a song about bleeding hearts and death, and then another in which she said her heart was like a bird's nest. And then everybody laughed again, and then we went to bed. Looking through my bedroom window, out into the moonlight and the unending smoke-colored snow, I could see the lights in the windows of all the other houses on our hill and hear the music rising from them up the long, steadily falling night. I turned the gas down. I got into bed. I said some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I slept. At this point in our service, we'll be passing the light from our chalice to the candles you got when you came in, and once we get everything square, we'll be singing the hymn number 251, Silent Night, Holy Night. So you should probably go ahead and open your hymnal and get prepared so you can balance the flame and the hymnal at the same time. So.
and beams from thy holy face with the dawn of redeeming grace. Sleep in heavenly peace. Sleep in heavenly peace.
Our closing words come from the Reverend Tom Shade. Night has fallen. Stars beckon in an indigo and velvet sky. Somewhere a baby is being born. Tonight the world lazes in a love of goodness, while glories stream from heaven afar. God is meeting us tonight where we are. So be not afraid and be of good cheer. We wish you each and all very Merry Christmas. The hopes and fears of all the years have been met. So rest beside the winding road and hear the angels sing.
Please join me in reading the words for the extinguishing of the chalice flame. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.